Um, we're going to start our next session, which is Real Talk with Dr. Ivette Ruiz. Healing by Growing Farms founder Dr. Ivette Ruiz was inspired to create a healing trauma-based farm after suffering a traumatic brain injury 2.5 years ago, while preparing for a disaster relief deployment during Hurricane Isaias in 2020. Her brain injury caused prolonged PCS, post-concussion syndrome, and her life has not been the same since. She's experienced discrimination, unemployment, and a lack of proper and timely medical care and attention. After realizing how difficult it was to get any treatment or understanding, her salvation was working in her home gardens, tending to her chickens, finding a way to help those impacted gravely by the COVID pandemic, and donating over 300 pounds of food on her first growing season to local food deserts. As a Latinx, third-generation new farmer and first-generation doctoral graduate, Dr. Ruiz wants to use her vast knowledge and experiences to help others who have gone and are going through similar hardships. Her executive work in healthcare, humanitarian relief, public service, food sovereignty, social justice, and academia have helped prepare her to lead this innovative ministry and this first Northeast Disability and Agriculture Conference. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce you all to Dr. Ivette Ruiz.
My name is Ivette. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I want to start by saying thank you to all the amazing volunteers that have been here today, that have come from various states. So let's give them a hand. And then I also want to say thank you for all the speakers that came before me. I believe that we took something of value from every single one of them. And my goal is to be able sort of to tie all that in for us as I speak. So a few people had sort of asked me, how do we get here? Why did you decide to do this? What prompted you? And so I want to talk a little bit about that journey, how I got here, outside of what Robert read, and also talk about a survey that I conducted that sort of led this work and informed what sort of topics we will have today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what more knowledge and research can we add to your current toolboxes around accessibility and accommodation. And the last two items that I would like to do is sort of talk about sharing reflections, and then we're going to talk about a gift. And I'll surprise you about that later. So I'm going to start with the story of whips and potatoes. Who knows what whips are? What are whips? Serena and Jim, you don't count. Anybody else? What are whips? Okay, so I wish you have brought one. Shoot. Okay, Serena, what's a whip?
It's a little baby tree.
Say it louder so they can hear you back there.
It's a little baby tree. It's like the very start of it that you can grow a bigger tree that these were grown from, likely, and you can wrap them and so on.
Yes, so it looks like a little pencil. It looks like this. He has no leaves, he has no roots, he has nothing. And my journey started there, and everybody knows potato seeds, right? So after my injury, I got injured on the way to a deployment to help with a hurricane. And I lost, in my own property, I had lost several trees. And there was a gentleman, another farmer, giving away trees. That was what the title was, giving away trees. And I said, well, I lost a whole bunch, and I had to cut down a whole bunch. Can I buy some trees from you? I came from physical therapy one day and found this big stack on my door. And there was a whole bunch of sticks, like dead sticks and branches. And I was like, what is that? What am I supposed to do with that? Well, those were whips. And he had donated over 100 of them, all types of fruits and shrubs and flowers and all these things. I didn't know what to do with them. It was late fall, 2020, and I never had seen it before. I didn't know what to do with it. I called them and I emailed them, And I said, what do I do with this? They explained. I put them all into, one day, I put all 100 of them in small potting soils and took them outside. And then he said to me, let it be a reminder that when you see those whips begin to grow, that with it you can grow as well and be healed and be nurtured. So, my journey started there. I was quickly reminded that when we have trauma or when we have an injury, that is in those dark places that we grow. And so I started growing just like a crazy person. I started growing potatoes and trees and plants, and I said, wow, I wanted to be a farmer one day when I retire. But that my process got sped up, and I didn't know why. But in it, I learned that while I was healing through this process, there were other people that I was learning about that had mental health struggles, that had stress, that were suicidal, and that had very, very dark stories. And I say today that it was because of the whips and the potatoes that it saved my life. When I was suicidal, and I didn't want to live anymore, I got hope from seeing something give birth to roots and shoots and green and all of the beautiful things. So I started teaching people that were telling me that they were suicidal in therapy, that was not the way, that I could help them, that I found a way. And by talking to people and teaching them that there could be hope in doing something and finding a new purpose, is how Healing by Growing Farms developed. During this whole process, I had a lot of discrimination. I was afraid to speak up. I was embarrassed to tell people I had a disability now. I was a top executive for Yale University. I taught at the top universities. I have been traveling the world with all the executive work that I've done with FEMA and the National American Red Cross, and no longer could I do any of that. 20 years of college, and I became a fourth grader. That's a lot. And so it takes time to rebuild, but it was in that journey that I was able to discover that there's so many other people that need it. And so when I started putting patterns together that emerged from me, discrimination, somebody said earlier, doctor diagnosis that wasn't correct, that they told you, you're okay, you'll be fine, just go with it, knowing that you're not okay. So yes, challenge your doctors and challenge the people that are saying to you that you don't have nothing. You know yourself better than anybody else. So my message to you is if you feel that something is off with you, trust that, believe in that, and then research it. I started discovering that there was discrimination around people that had injuries. And traumatic brain injury is one of those things that happen in agriculture at least once a week to somebody. There's actually research that indicates that once a week a farmer dies of an injury. Because as Chris said earlier, according to some studies based on injuries, one of the top organizations of the field that people get hurt. And so I started noticing discrimination, isolation. I started working with organizations that could not serve me, did not know how to serve me, but were supposed to serve me. I started going to community organizations that were supposed to be able to advocate for me and help me. They couldn't do it either, because they looked at me and they saw that I was a person with a title, and I was a person that looked okay, but inside of me, they didn't know the broken pieces. And so I started doing research. I'm a researcher by trade. And I started collecting information, and I started asking other farmers, have you ever been discriminated against because of your disability? Not whether you were a veteran or because you were a BIPAC person or specifically, I wanted to know who has been discriminated based on limitations. And I started learning that more and more farmers that I spoke to that had these issues. And so 2 years ago, I said to myself, when I get better, I'm gonna put a conference together. And that conference is gonna bring together community supporters, service providers, and farmers. And I'm gonna bring them together so that they could hear each other's stories, and they could hear each other's struggles and wins, and that they could build community together, network together, and be able to break the stigma that you have to do it, or you have to do it, or it's your responsibility. It's all of our responsibility. We all own this together. People don't know what they don't know, right? So I can blame the community supporters, I can blame the providers and say they were not there for me. But if they've never dealt with someone with a disability, they don't know what they don't know. It's my job to teach them. I could sit here and point the finger and tell people, you have to be an advocate, you have to be able to do this. The exercise we just did, we need that. I was so excited about that activity. How do we turn that around and reverse it? And we're gonna do that now. And we have the community supporters in this room and the service providers write down for us 3 things that they can do to make a change, to be advocate for us. And what can they change in their system? What can they change in their process so that they can hear us and see us, not for a week or 2 months or 6 months, and then they forget and we have to remind them again. But what can they do outgoing so that as our farmers continue to age, 50+% of our farmers are aging. They have disabilities, their knees hurt, their vision is changing. What are we gonna do to take care of them? So we have to be able to come together to be able to create tools and accessible ways so that they can feel comfortable and safe to come to organizations and community groups and say, this is what I need. Some other things I would like to suggest that service providers and community members can do in terms of, I'm gonna use Becca's word because it's a real world, and it's assessments. It's not hard to look around your environment. If your environment is in an office, simple things as a chair. What is the weight maximum of this chair? Is this chair is only for a petite person? Or maybe 2 of me? What about is there someone that is 4 sizes of me? If you don't have that in your office space, in your waiting room, then that is an access issue. Serena talked earlier about simple things that I have requested that it's really hard for me to look at my screen. The light, I'm very sensitive to light, and every day is different. There are days I could be in my computer for 13 hours, not a problem. And there are days, multiple days, that I can't look at anything at all. So one of my accommodations that I ask people to do is please send me audio messages. Because I have an app on my phone that will read me the messages. And if I need to respond, I could speak to it and it will write my messages. And I don't have to be exposed to that light all the time. And then I have to look at the provider that I'm asking for that accommodation for and say, well, do you even know how to do it? We assume they know how to do it. We assume that they have the phones and the capacity to do it, but sometimes they don't. And this is when I say that we have to talk and engage each other, because we assume that if I'm asking you for something, you're not giving it to me, you should have it, you got money. You are UConn, I'm gonna use UConn for that. And it's not how it is, maybe they don't know. I remember the first time I applied for a grant, a UConn extension or solid ground, not sure which one it was. At that time, they didn't have applications on a Word document or a PDF, and I could not do it on the screen. I simply talked to a couple people, and then they emailed me the attachment. I was able to print it. That was an accommodation for me. So now I can do it by hand, and then I can submit it to somebody. Or I could get somebody to help me because I had it tangible. Small accommodations, right? Another thing that may be another accommodation for providers and community service, look at your websites. Are they accessible? Can you increase the font? Is there a way to decrease the movement of the page? I have a major issue with movement. Anything that scrolls up and down or sideways, makes me really whoopy. It's really bad. I don't know how many here have ever experienced a visual impairment like that, but it hurts your eyes. It's painful. Like you're literally like holding your eyes like that. Most people don't get it. So when you're doing presentations, when you have a website, you can regulate the speed that things come through. If you have a movie, if you have a video, there are people that get seizures by looking at movement that moves too fast. And so really important that people are aware of these things. If you have the light, you have really bright lights in your office, what can you do to ensure that those can be dim? Or do you have glasses in the waiting area or in some place that people can ask for them or borrow them? These are some of the things that are easy things. Now, there are some big things as well, but we're starting with the little. And how does that apply to the farmer? Well, if I'm a farmer and I'm going to apply for a loan, I went to the FSA office. I'm going to use that as an example, because I like to use real life examples because it could happen to any of us. And you could utilize. I went to the one FSA office, and I wasn't able to do all the attachments they sent me. They sent me like 10 attachments. You're gonna get these attachments in the mail, and that's how you're gonna get your farm registration, and you're gonna do this and you're gonna do that. When I got them, I was like so overwhelmed, I didn't know what to do with myself. Like, where do I start? So, and I'm someone that can pretty much, I've grown up in therapy, so I'm no longer in 4th grade. I'm now back to a college level. Took me 3 years to get there. And so it's hard work. So the assumption was, well, she could do all of them. So I had to educate them. I got mad at first. I said, what does this lady think? She crazy. But I contacted them and I said, I can't do that. Is there anyone there that can help me complete these forms? Again, we have to educate ourselves and them. It's just not them. They're not being bad. They don't hate us. They're not always being intentional. That's not the case. I wanted us to be able to think about, there are people that just don't know, and it's our job to educate them. And I just simply said, I have this condition. I can't complete all those papers. This is what I need. I need somebody to help me complete them, or I need more time. The lady at the other end said, oh, if that's what you need, you could come to my office at this time on this day, and I will help you complete them. The lady sat there for 4 hours. They helped me complete every file. It took 4 hours. It would have taken me probably 3 weeks or longer. So these are the simple things that service providers can do and community providers can do to bring support to the farm organizations and farm communities. And so when I talk about whips and potatoes, it may be as simple as a little tree or a potato, but even planting is hard for some people. As much joy as it brings them, as much as they want to do it, maybe they can't bend down. So maybe they need an accommodation. An accommodation could be as simply as getting an elevated raised bed. Not a raised bed, an elevated raised bed. It makes a difference for those people that can't bend down, that have knee problems. There might be people that have wheelchairs or that have walkers or canes that have a hard time working against a bed. So you could invest on making or buying a bed that is like a U shape so that people can go in the cubby and be able to work closer and more comfortable. So these are some ways. I have a whole bunch, but I just want to give some specific examples when I'm talking about what does it look like for a community service who may have a community garden to make it more accessible. What does it look like for a service provider that may be running a program like Farm Credit East? And what does it look like for a farmer? So Serena spent a lot of time about how to advocate for self, and love that, because that is one of the biggest things that we need to do is have that voice. But we also need to be able to be willing to educate the people that don't know. And we have to be very clear and specific with what we need. And so whether that is how to grow a whip or I need you to help me complete a form, or I need the font to be bigger, or the blue color is giving me pain. We need to be able to express those things. In the survey that we conducted, I'm going to move very quickly through this, but we had several specific questions for people to answer. And one of the questions here is, are you a farmer, service provider, or community supporter? 42% of the people who completed the survey out of 105 responses were farmers. 36% were service providers, and the orange, yellow looking were community supporters, 21%. I'm just going to give you a whole bunch of numbers so that you could get a perspective of where we at and where people are at. The age of the people that completed this survey, which informed this conference, were 62% were 29, between the ages of 29 and 49, 22.9% were 50 and over, and 14.3 were between the ages of 18 and 28. How many of those 105 were veterans? Less than 3%. Have you or loved ones or staff member experienced a head injury? I was surprisingly shocked to see that out of 105, more than half of the people said that someone in their loved ones or their staff has suffered a brain injury. Many times when there are people with brain injuries, they don't go to the hospital. Farmers don't go to the hospital. They don't have insurance. So a lot of farmers don't have insurance or have underinsurance, health insurance. And therefore, they get a bump on the head, a horse kicks them, a cow kicks them, a goat kicks them, they hit their head on the coop, they slip and fall, and they just slide it off and think it's nothing. And then 2 years later, 6 months later, they have symptoms. And they become someone who has limitations because of a lack of health care or of access or funds. And so for me, it was very surprising to see that large number of people that had brain injury. Next one. One of the subjects that is important for us to think about and talk about is suicide amongst farmers. So close to 82% of folks know that that is the problem. And so we have a lot of trainings, a lot of programs, as we heard from a few of them this morning, that talk about mental health and suicide and stress and all that. But sometimes what is missing, which is what I wanted us to do here, is to give specific tools on how we can help people overcome. So not just a suicide hotline, not just a crisis line, not just a phone number, but what can they do themselves to be able to take it to the next level. Not everybody's going to make that call. Not everybody has someone that they trust. So how can we as community supporters and service providers build a relationship of trust so that our farmers can come to us? Do you or a staff member have a disability? Over 75% of people reported having a disability out of the 105. I don't know about you all, but that's a huge number. And so to me, that was very concerning. I got a chance to speak to some of the folks that took the survey and answer in a specific way. And a lot of the comments that I got from the farmers were that they did not tell their supervisors or their bosses, so that it was something that they felt it was a stigma and they did not want to share. Today we learned about ways to advocate for themselves and have a voice, and so I encourage you all that if that number represents anybody here in this room, to please speak up and to please educate folks. It's okay to tell your story if you're comfortable with it. Next. Some of the disabilities that came up during the survey were limited English proficiency, mobility, pregnancy, visual impairment, hearing impairment, using durable equipment, sensory needs, traumatic brain injury, PTSD, depression. Which one is the biggest one there? Can you always see depression? No. And so it's really, really, really important again that we're having these conversations. And These conversations and this information comes out to the light when we build relationships. It's building relationship based on trust and confidence. So I'm going to stop here for 1 minute, and I'm going to have, I'm going to provide a couple of resources that go along what we just learned. And so we talked about building your toolkit and adding to those resources. So we created something that we call lifesavers, and Serena and Robert are going to pass them out for me. And each of you is going to get a couple of these lifesavers, and they're meant to be wallet-sized cards, or you can put them in your neck, and you can put them in your workplace. If you're a farmer, you can put it in your pocket. It's a place to hang, or you could take it out of the card and keep it with you. What you will have here, I apologize when we printed these. When we printed these, they made a mistake and they made everything extra tiny. But we will be sending the PDF links to everybody so that you can enlarge it and print it yourself. So our apologies. But we still wanted to have, so Chris is going to list the checklist of things. Right here. So this is a checklist of things to look out for.
So on the card, lifesaver card, low energy, difficulty concentrating, persistent sadness, stress, or irritability, significant changes in weight and eating patterns, difficulty performing tasks that you once did with little effort, problems sleeping, persistent worry or fear, avoidance and or isolation, frequent thoughts of death or suicide, and lack of interest or pleasure in activities. And on the back?
And on the back, what you have now, in the back, what you will have now is a list of resources.
On the back, lifesaver contacts, a crisis text line, text hello or hola to 741-741 to speak to a professional. Farm Credit East customers and family members, 800-252-455. Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, 988 in English or Spanish. And then 1-800-FARM is also available in English and Spanish. Yep. Good job.
And on the bottom, there's an empty spot that says, my trusted lifesaver. What I would like for you to put there is, who is your trusted lifesaver? If you fell down and broke your toe, or if you were having a bad day, or if you just won the lottery, who will be that person that you will reach out to first? And we're going to send all these links in PDF so that you can print them to any size that you desire. And the goal is to keep these in your office, to keep them in your farms, in your community organizations. And if you see a farmer or individual or even a co-worker that is showing one of these signs that are on your card, the phone numbers now to be able to say, here are some phone numbers for you to call, or may I help you call the numbers? Can we do it together? Okay? There's a lot more to this, but I wanted to provide these resources for you. Any questions about the lifesavers? And the next thing I wanted to show is, if you look up here, it says, do you feel comfortable talking to a distressed farmer or their loved ones? And 75% of the folks said they feel comfortable speaking to someone, but they don't know what to do next. So now today, you heard from many of us that I have given you some tools and some resources for you to be able to help by providing a phone number, or offering to make a call, or maybe referring to the local wellness center, okay? One of the questions that came up in the survey was that people did not know the reality of farmers. That's why we did those stories earlier, that they didn't see how a farmer with a disability could actually farm, and so people were having a hard time with that concept. But also, there's some people that can do it better than others because there's power play dynamics, right? So racism plays in it, gender plays in it, education plays in it, economics plays into it, all of that plays in it. So Chris and I can have the same exact disability, but we may get completely different treatments. And so it's really, really important to be mindful of that as well, that there are power dynamics that exist amongst organizations and communities. So take a deep look at what services you're offering. One thing that I say to people is, if I go to your waiting area, are there magazines in different colors? Meaning, do I see myself in your magazines? If I pick a magazine from your organization, am I gonna be able to understand it in my native language? So, simple things, but that mean a lot. If I'm going to your office and the light is really, really bright, can you give me something like a light reducing pair of glasses just to help me through my appointment? If you have radio, oh, this is missing. I want to show you some more things, but they're not in the bag. I think we needed to, that's okay, it's okay. So some people, there's music in the background happening, and you get overload of hearing and auditory, so some people need to wear earmuffs. So do you have those available? So thinking about those things. Some people, somebody show me a fidgety. Who has a fidgety on their table? So some people get antsy being around, waiting, don't know when they're gonna be called next. Having little things like this on your tables that are fidgety just keeps people calm, because it's not just for kids, it's for adults too, okay? Some people really, really love to engage in, I don't want to open it because it's a brand new packet, but like to engage in chewing things. And so if you ever notice somebody chewing their nails all the way down to the thumb, to the bone, if you provide some of these are helpful. These are chewable sensory kit tools that people can use instead. Or you've seen somebody with a toothpick or a straw in their mouth all the time. So these are simple things that you could use. Does your waiting area have simple things just as a coloring book? Not for kids, I'm talking about adults. These are things that can ease anxiety, can calm somebody down. Fortunately, if I'm waiting to receive a loan and you already know that my loan is going to be denied, my grant is going to be denied, how can you ease me into that? Rather than sending me a generic card or a letter that says this. If you know your people on the other side have an issue with receiving information, what ways can you find to modify that so that it hits them differently? And so there's a lot more of these tools that we can talk about to add that correspond to the surveys that we collected, so that we can teach, again, community providers, service providers, and farmers, and connect them all. And these are some of the tools here. Today, we hope that you have been able to learn some tools that, whether you're a service provider, a community supporter, or a farmer, that you have now been able to see from all of the perspectives, not just one, and find ways that you can all support one another, that we can all support one another, and be able to advocate for ourselves, advocate for others. If we're a service organization, how do we make a place more accessible, more accommodating? And if I am a farmer, maybe working with other farmers or colleagues, how am I mindful and looking for things that may be red flags that I can provide support to them at all times? And so I'm going to conclude there and say thank you for everyone that was here today, for everyone that made the effort in what I'm understanding is the coldest day of the year, or maybe a few years. I could not have done this without none of you here to make this reality true. So thank you.